Ben Uyeda, a designer and maker, set out to build a container house, but the idea didn't stay small for long. One container turned into 2, then 3. Though that part only really matters once you understand how hard it was just to get started. There wasn't much clear information out there. Permits were confusing, costs were all over the place. It felt like trying to piece something together without a full picture. But instead of backing off, that uncertainty actually pushed the project forward. It didn't stop him. It just sent things in a new direction. Back in the spring of 2018, he bought 10 acres out in Joshua Tree, California. The land is almost a perfect square, with a small hill right in the middle, like it has always been meant to be there. While he was still waiting on survey drawings, he went ahead and made his first big, no-going-back decision. He ordered the shipping containers. And these weren't the beat-up, rusty boxes most people picture. In California, you have to use what they call one-trip containers, basically units that have only been used once, so their history is clear and they're safe to build with. Before any walls go up, before sunlight ever hits the cut steel, there's this quieter stage, something most people never think about, and almost no one ever sees. Anywhere a pipe doesn't run, that space doesn't just get left empty. It's filled in carefully, packed tight with rigid insulation. Then all are covered over with floorboards, and that hidden layer disappears for good. The window frames are made ahead of time, so when the container walls are finally cut open, the structure still holds its strength. Steel tubes get measured out, marked, and cut down to exact lengths. Then it all comes together as simple rectangular frames. Piece by piece, they're welded in place until the whole thing turns into a single rigid structure. The first cut doesn't come out quite right. The gap between the frame and the wall is wider than it should have been. Welding fixes it, but it leaves a lesson behind. Get it right early and everything that follows gets easier. The second opening is better. Slower cuts this time, cleaner lines, less cleanup afterward. Mistakes don't really disappear in this process. They just get taken in, adjusted for, and worked into what comes next. Openings in a container aren't as simple as cutting out a shape and dropping in a window or door. The moment you remove part of that steel wall, you're also removing part of what keeps the whole structure rigid. That's why each opening has to be planned with reinforcement in mind. The edges usually get framed out with steel tubing, so the load doesn't just stop at the cut. It gets redirected around it. Without that, the container can start to flex, especially when it's stacked or under stress. The door frame is made from steel tubes, carefully cut and welded together at each corner. It's not just about holding the shape in place. It's about removing any weak point that could show up later, especially in the corners, where stress tends to gather once the structure settles and starts carrying its own weight. Larger openings mean everything has to be reinforced more heavily. Thicker steel, wider tubing, nothing is left to chance. Temporary supports get added in too, not because they'll stay there, but because the structure needs help holding itself together while it's being changed. Stability, in a way, becomes something staged step by step. process of forming openings for the large sliding doors begins with careful planning and precise layout. The transformation is immediate. The enclosed steel box begins to take on a more open, architectural character. However, this visual change is matched by a structural one. The wall has been fundamentally weakened. Inside the container, a second structure starts to take shape, something quieter, but just as important. Against the cold steel shell, timber framing begins to go up along the interior walls, each piece set in place with a clear purpose. This isn't just an extra layer. This structure is doing real work. The container used to rely on its continuous steel skin to stay strong, but once those openings were cut, that strength was interrupted. So now the support has to come from within. The timber frame helps take on that role, spreading the load differently, giving the structure its balance back in a new way. Attaching wood framing to steel turns out to be slow, stubborn work. Brackets are nailed onto the lumber first, then fastened into the container's steel frame with self-tapping screws. None of them go in easily. There's resistance with every turn, just enough to slow things down. At the same time, extra blocking is added in places that don't seem important yet. It's there for what comes later: plywood, drywall, and all the finish layers that aren't visible now but are already part of the plan. Up above, the ceiling joists are measured out and set in place but left unattached for now. There's still more that needs to pass through that space first. Insulation, sprinkler lines, all the hidden systems that have to come before anything gets closed up. Early on, the frames are made from simple square steel tubes. They do the job, but they ask for a lot. Tight tolerances, careful alignment, not much room for error. Later, the approach shifts to angle steel. That small change adds a flange, and suddenly things start to come together more easily. Pieces line up with less effort, edges sit more naturally, and sealing the gaps becomes far more straightforward. The design isn't fixed, it's figuring itself out as it goes. Each version carries something forward, drops something else, and adjusts based on what actually worked in practice. With the new frames, the whole process feels lighter. Positioning is quicker, welding is cleaner, and there's a bit more forgiveness if something is slightly off. Even the finish looks sharper in the end, but by that point, that almost feels like a bonus rather than the goal. One of the most striking choices in the design is a pair of gelled-wen bifold doors, set up parallel to each other. They aren't picked just for function, they are chosen for the way they look, for the way they open the space up completely. When they're fully folded back, the line between inside and outside almost disappears. The house and the landscape start to feel like one continuous space, not two separate things. But that openness comes at a price. Every large glass opening means cutting into the steel skin of the container, and every cut weakens what was originally a self-supporting shell. That loss has to be made up for with extra reinforcement. Even knowing that, the choice stays the same. Light, transparency, and openness take priority over keeping the original steel intact. At the point where the door frames meet the corrugated steel of the container, the construction reveals its most vulnerable condition: small but continuous gaps where air, water, and heat move freely. To stabilize these spaces, the team uses fire-resistant spray foam insulation, carefully injecting it into the irregular voids between materials. The foam is not the final layer. It is a hidden core, a material meant to occupy space rather than finish it. Its role is to expand, harden, and slowly lock itself into every irregular gap between steel and frame, sealing what would otherwise remain open paths for air and moisture. Once it sets, it becomes part of the structure in a quiet way, no longer visible but fully present. Although spray foam would have been the ideal choice from a design standpoint, the decision is made to rely mainly on rigid insulation for much of the build, driven by the goal of self-performed installation. Rigid boards offer a simpler, more controlled approach. They are easy to handle, easy to cut with basic tools, and fitted by hand into the framing cavities without specialized equipment. This method slows things down, but it keeps the process in the team's own hands. Because none of the team has previously built a shipping container house, the process unfolds as an ongoing experiment. Each step becomes a way to learn in real time, watching how different systems behave once they are actually put together, before committing those same methods across the rest of the structure. This trial section includes one end wall, which is insulated first and then covered with 1/2-inch OSB. To create an uninterrupted thermal surface across the entire floor, the team uses insulated subfloor panels, a product commonly used in basement retrofits. Each panel combines oriented strand board with a bonded layer of rigid foam insulation. In the third container, a different method is used. Rigid insulation boards are placed directly on top of the existing plywood floor, forming the base thermal layer. Once the boards are fitted and aligned, a final layer of plywood is installed over the entire assembly. To begin forming the bedroom window surround, a thin plate steel frame is built to fit precisely around the opening. Each piece of steel is cut carefully and welded together, forming a continuous perimeter that sets the exact edge of the window. The structural engineer requires 1/2-inch sheathing on all interior walls, so the team starts cutting plywood and nailing it into place. The specification isn't optional. It has to be followed exactly. In this location, every new house is required to include a sprinkler system for fire suppression. So that system goes in first, running through the structure before anything gets sealed up. An experienced drywall crew moves through the house quickly, working with a level of speed and precision that comes from repetition. What might take others weeks is done in just 2 days. They install and screw in drywall panels, setting them tightly into place across every room. Then comes the mud and tape, carefully covering every seam so the walls start to feel continuous instead of broken into sheets. After that, trim is added to every corner, tightening up the edges and transitions. The final step is a full skim coat over all the surfaces, smoothing everything out into clean, even walls. With that, the structure is fully enclosed and the interior shifts from exposed framing to finished space. A 1,500-gallon concrete septic tank is selected and lowered into place with a crane after a carefully measured excavation. It looks simple once it's in the ground, but inside it's doing something more complex. The tank is designed to separate waste into 3 layers. Grease, oils, and soaps rise to the top, forming a floating scum layer. Heavier solids sink down and settle at the bottom, where they slowly break down into sludge. In between those two layers sits the effluent, a liquid mixture that holds bacteria, along with dissolved nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, moving through the system as part of the treatment process. Instead of letting that effluent drain out into a typical leach field, the system is set up to reuse it. The liquid is pumped out and directed into planter beds, where it can both water and feed the plants. It's a different way of thinking about waste, not something to get rid of, but something that can still serve a purpose. By sending it into the landscape, the system slows how quickly the tank fills up, while also putting those nutrients to use, instead of letting them go to waste. A network of pipes connects the septic tank to the planter beds. The effluent is pumped upward through a 1-inch polyethylene line by a submersible pump, triggered by a floating buoy inside the tank. As the liquid level rises, the float lifts with it. Once it reaches a set point, the pump switches on automatically, sending the effluent out toward the planters. The whole cycle is simple and self-regulating. When Ben first bought the land, even the agent couldn't say for sure whether electricity or water was available, so he checked for himself. Looking at satellite imagery, he spotted a line of electrical poles running alongside the property. After contacting the utility company, they confirmed that service is possible. However, it requires installing a new transformer on a nearby pole before the connection can be made. As finishing work moves ahead, the window and door frames are sealed with fire-blocking spray foam. The choice of this foam is purely practical. It holds up under site conditions and won't be damaged by the heat and activity that follow during the remaining welding work. For the exterior paint, Ben goes to Home Depot and chooses PPG paints, timeless exterior paint in a color called Elegant Charcoal. He picks the flat matte finish for the final look. For the painting, he hires Henry, an experienced sprayer who knows how to handle the equipment with precision. To prevent movement during an earthquake that could shear plumbing and electrical connections, the team measures out the exact locations for a series of holes and uses a drill press to cut 1-inch openings through the steel. Heavy steel plates are prepared for this purpose, designed to be welded directly onto the corner blocks of the containers. Once in place, the threaded rod is run through the holes and down into the concrete foundation. Anchoring epoxy is then injected to lock everything in. As it cures, it binds the steel, rod, and concrete into a single system, holding the structure firmly in place even under seismic movement. The house sits about 70 feet from the nearest utility pole, with the meter and main breaker panel placed on the side closest to it. From there, all the interior wiring branches out, while the separate containers are tied together through underground conduit. A battery backup system is installed to keep things running during outages and to store energy from the solar panels. Shipping containers are narrow, and once insulation and framing go in, the space ends up at just a little over 7 feet from drywall to drywall. It's tight, but still workable. A galley-style kitchen fits naturally into that kind of layout. All the cooking elements are lined up along one wall, while the opposite side becomes a mix of open shelving and cabinets, creating a kind of pantry wall. Everything in the kitchen comes from Home Depot, which ends up offering more than expected. Plenty of modern options that fit surprisingly well in a smaller home like this. Once everything arrives, the cabinets are brought in and set out loosely to check how they line up with the plan. It's a simple step, but it helps to see it all in place before anything gets fixed. The countertop installers arrive and start by building a template right on site using 1/4-inch plywood. The template is carefully removed and taken back to the shop. That becomes the guide for cutting the quartz, making sure the final countertop drops into place without surprises. The backsplash is made with hexagonal tiles, a design detail Ben has wanted to try for a long time. Instead of following a strict grid, the layout shifts slightly, breaking the pattern in a subtle way. The hexagon shape already brings its own geometry, but the asymmetry adds a sense of movement, making the surface feel less rigid and more intentional. On the pantry side, instead of going all in on open shelving, the team mixes solid oak shelves with pantry cabinets. The depth of the space is tight, only about 12 inches, so standard options don't really fit. To make it work, they use cabinets normally meant for upper installations, adapting them for this narrower footprint. The team then builds custom shelving from 3/4-inch solid oak. The goal is a clean, modern interior with a minimalist feel. As the shelves go in, a new challenge shows up. Several electrical outlets land exactly where the shelving is meant to sit. Instead of forcing the layout, the team adjusts on the spot, carefully working around each one so the function stays intact while the clean flow of the design is preserved. Bringing in the oak changes the whole space. The warmth of the wood breaks up the white surfaces and softens the overall look, creating a balance that feels more natural and lived in without losing the simplicity. The bathroom in the main container sits right between the kitchen and the bedroom. It's designed as a walk-through space, mainly to avoid losing valuable square footage to hallways. With the whole layout already open, the focus shifts to making each transition feel smooth instead of boxed in. Every move from one space to the next has to work within that flow. Waterproofing and crack prevention are handled with a membrane applied over the green board. Once it cures, the surface is ready for the next step. The team moves on to troweling thin-set mortar and starts laying the mini hexagon tiles, carefully setting each piece so the pattern comes together cleanly across the wall. The bathroom floor starts with cement board laid over the plywood subfloor. It goes down as the first hard layer before any tile work begins. This step creates a stable base and adds moisture resistance, giving the floor a solid foundation. The glass shower enclosure is installed by first fixing metal tracks directly into the tiled walls. It's a precise step, since the installers have to drill through the finished tile without cracking or damaging it. Once the tracks are secured, the glass panels are lifted into place and carefully set into the framing system. The flooring uses hexagonal tile that gradually transitions into the wood flooring of the adjacent bedroom. The idea is to let the two materials meet in a way that feels natural, not abrupt. Instead of a hard break between tile and wood, the shift happens as a visual and physical blend across the threshold. It helps the small continuous space feel more connected, while still letting each area keep its own character. Because the engineered wood flooring is roughly the same thickness as the tile, a leveling adjustment is needed. A half-inch layer of plywood is added over the subfloor, secured with construction adhesive and screws. This buildup raises the wood flooring system just enough so that once finished, it sits flush with the cement board and tile surface. Extra sheets of hexagonal tile act as physical templates. These sheets are cut and shaped to match the installed tile pattern, then laid directly over the wood flooring boards. From there, the wood can be cut to follow that outline precisely, making sure the transition between tile and wood matches the irregular geometry without gaps or misalignment. The transition joint between the tile and the wood is filled using Fusion Pro grout in bright white, a pre-mixed grout chosen for its stain resistance and flexibility. It settles into the seam between the two materials, locking the edge in place while still allowing for a bit of movement over time. Installing the vanity itself isn't especially complicated. It's basically setting a cabinet in place, almost like a piece of furniture, and then anchoring it securely to the wall so it doesn't move. The challenge comes from the fact that the bathroom walls are fully tiled. Anything that needs to be mounted, like mirrors or towel bars, means drilling directly through tile. That's where things slow down to avoid cracking the tile or throwing off the alignment. On the bedroom side, the wall cavity is used to house the control panel for the smart shower system. Rather than leaving it exposed, a solid oak bookshelf is built and mounted over it, partially concealing the panel while adding a functional element to the space. After completing the more complex flooring transition in the main bedroom, where hexagonal tile blends into wood flooring, the installation in the guest bedroom is much simpler. The space uses a wide plank engineered flooring system that clicks and locks together with a whitewashed French oak finish. The design includes a dedicated need for luggage storage space for Airbnb guests, which leads to the decision to build a raised deck about 12 inches above the bedroom floor. This elevated platform creates a practical storage area underneath while preserving usable floor space in the compact room. The natural tone of the oak is softened, with a thin antique white wood stain is applied. It is also applied to the front edges of the bed platform to enhance the feeling of intimacy in the small space. A curtain rod is installed above the bed area, creating a canopy-like effect. Linen curtains are hung to soften the room and reinforce a cozy, enclosed atmosphere. The bed becomes the primary piece of furniture in the room, and it is designed not just for sleeping, but also for lounging, watching shows, and charging devices throughout the day. Because of this, access to power is treated as a central part of the layout rather than an afterthought. At the foot of the bed, a clean opening is drilled into the structure and fitted with a grommet. This allows a power cord to pass neatly through the bed platform without creating clutter. To support everyday use, a shelf is added beneath the window. It's positioned as a small landing zone within arm's reach of the bed, where books, a glass of water, or a phone can easily be placed. The decision to use mini splits for the HVAC system comes down to the conditions in Joshua Tree, where daytime heat can be intense and nighttime temperatures drop sharply. This setup allows each space to be conditioned directly, which works especially well in a container-based layout where space is limited and every inch matters. Because of the control requirements, the system installation is handed off to professionals. In the end, what started as a set of shipping containers slowly turns into something much more personal, a place shaped by small decisions, constant adjustments, and a very clear vision that never really let go. It becomes more than a house. It becomes a container hotel experience, a space where strangers can step inside and feel what happens when creativity is pushed through limits instead of stopped by them. What was once just an idea in the desert now stands as proof that even rigid steel boxes can be turned into something warm, livable, and open to the world. From raw materials to a finished creation, this is just one story. Subscribe to Macarium and be part of the next one. Your ideas might shape what we build next.